Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 4 of Truth Live, here for an emergency session to answer all of your pressing questions on the new H-1B $100,000 proclamation. Today, we are joined by partner and attorney Min Kim from our Edison, New Jersey office and attorney Kirti from our Santa Clara office. Hi there, Min and Kirti, welcome.
Hey, Arianna.
Thank
It's
you
me
so much
again.
for taking the time to be here with us today and answer all of our pressing questions on this topic. This conversation is for informational purposes only. If you have any questions, please comment them below or email us at info@choop.com. So, Min, can you tell us a little bit about how employers should handle situations where payment confirmation is maybe delayed, but the filing deadline is urgent?
It's certainly a tricky situation since it's already been a week since the presidential proclamation was issued, and still, it remains rather unclear when the administration will announce those procedures for employers to follow in paying this proposed new $100,000 fee. As of now, no instructions have been issued regarding how to pay the fee or how to request an exemption under the national interest exception. That's a huge issue as employers are still left in the dark as to how to pay this fee, and just as important, how to track the payment of this $100,000 fee once it has been paid. The proclamation, it requires petitioning employers to obtain proof of payment prior to filing and directs the U.S. Department of State also to verify payment before visa issuance. But, there doesn't seem to be, any kind of procedure for employers to track the payment, once notification goes from one agency to the next. USCIS is expected to release implementation procedures hopefully soon. So procedures like, whether payment will be made through a dedicated paper form or online portal, or perhaps through, some additional remittance submitted with the petition. But because, so much is unknown, employers should absolutely build in additional lead time for all filings. If a deadline is approaching, and payment has not cleared for an H-1B case that clearly falls within the kinds of petitions that require this $100,000 fee, then filing without proof ultimately risks rejection, or in the best case scenario, at least a request for evidence to be received, which will further delays the case adjudication. I suppose in the end, contingency planning is key. Missing an H-1B filing deadline is disastrous, as it could cause the employee to fall out of status.
Definitely, yeah, that's a really important aspect of it. So, what about prepaying or batch paying? Can employers prepay or batch pay fees for multiple petitions? Is that going to be allowed?
Um, I don't want to, I suppose I don't want to keep repeating myself, but unfortunately at this stage, there really is no guidance, unfortunately, that allows any kind of prepayment or pooling of fees. Each petition is sort of tied to a specific worker. At least that's what we know as of now. And USCIS, they generally require payment that corresponds exactly to the case that's being filed. Employers should assume payments must be made on a petition by petition basis, and attempting to, I don't know, like prepay without authorization, it could result in rejection. So once again, we simply don't know the procedure that Homeland Security or the State Department will follow, because frankly speaking, those agencies are sort of kind of figuring things out themselves and developing these same procedures right now. So until they do, we are kind of, we're simply kind of in a holding pattern.
Got it. Okay, so what internal policies do you think companies should adopt to standardize compliance across HR and legal teams?
Employers should implement, written protocols that require HR to coordinate with their finance team and immigration counsel before filing, I would imagine. In the end, communication amongst key stakeholders is rather critical because we're talking about a huge investment here that the H-1B employer is making. Thus, employers that are intending to file an H-1B petition for a beneficiary currently outside the U.S., they should budget an additional $100,000 on top of the standard filing fees and ensure their corporate leadership is informed and approves this expense amount. What can help with this added level of communication and accountability is, designating responsible personnel for payments, perhaps requiring a dual sign-off for large transactions, maintaining a compliance calendar, even. Standardized procedures ultimately reduce the risk of missed deadlines, misapplied funds, or inconsistent record keeping. And, it should go without saying that all stakeholders should absolutely continue to monitor USCIS guidance regarding payment and documentation requirements, as non-compliance with the prescribed procedures, it could result in rejection or even denial of the petition.
Great points. Communication and budgeting are key here. So, how would you say companies should update their public access files to reflect this new fee?
Well, regulations, they don't require the $100,000 payment to be disclosed in the public access file, or PAF for short. However, I would agree with you. It wouldn't be the worst idea to perhaps include proof of payment somewhere in the H-1B employee's employment file. Once again, it's not so much a DOL, OFLC or wage and hour issue, because it seems the $100,000 payment is tied to the filing of the I-129 petition with USCIS, or potentially tied to a visa issuance at the consulate abroad, which is then a State Department issue. But regardless, clear documentation and transparency and overall preparedness, they're timeless good practices to adhere to, especially in these uncertain times. The employer might not be audited by Department of Labor, but what about FDNS site visit, which is a USCIS initiative? If I were an FDNS officer, I would certainly think that verifying the $100,000 payment would be relevant to ensuring that the I-129 was filed and remained in good terms and approvable. So yeah, retaining proof of payment somewhere in the worker's file is absolutely recommended.
Great insights there. Thank you for covering compliance, Min. Kirti, I want to go over to you to ask a little bit about how might this change affect mergers, acquisitions, or even corporate restructurings involving H-1B employees?
Well, I mean, it, you know, aside from purchasing contracts and purchasing products that a company owns, mergers and acquisitions definitely involves a lot of, acquisitions of manpower as well. So it's definitely a good question to address. But I think in the larger scheme of things, H-1Bs are a small portion of the workforce. So it may not have a major impact. However, I think it is something that you definitely need to consider when going through a mergers and acquisitions, simply because you may be faced with this a larger charge than you anticipated from a HR perspective of $100,000 for, if the once we get, as Min said, once we get more clarity, we'll know how much of this $100,000 is going to come into play, whether it's for people that are just traveling, whether it's only for new ones, or if this proclamation expires in a year, and everything goes back to normal, you don't really know. However, mergers and acquisition is still a big issue. In this aspect, you have to take this under consideration. It will be a part, unfortunately, it will be a part of the checklist that they have to examine when they're acquiring companies that have people, non-immigrant workers that are, on H-1Bs and other statuses as well. This will be another step they have to consider.
Absolutely. Yeah, great points there. Do you think companies should renegotiate contracts with clients that depend heavily on H-1B talent?
Um, Yeah, I mean, yes and no. Part of it is that I don't know how much leverage they would have in terms of negotiating contracts simply because their costs went up. Obviously, but I think of it like almost like inflationary push standpoint that, your costs are going up, so that's going to affect your your ability to be able to charge a certain amount depending on how large the workforce is and how much this is going to impact their profit margin and whatnot, they're definitely going to have to revisit their contract because they may be affected indirectly or directly or indirectly. So they need to clarify with their, partners, and they have to clarify with their clients that, hey, there may be a change coming, so there's no disruption or surprises in their agreements and their services towards them.
Absolutely. So, how can employers balance the $100,000 fee against long-term workforce planning, such as automation or domestic training? Do we have any insight here?
Many employers will definitely revisit the cost benefit analysis of the H-1B sponsorship program. And I think this is going to bring under scrutiny other types of visas as well. Because and if the last year or so has taught us anything is that corporate America looks for stability and reliance on their workforce, right? So during the pandemic, there was a problem with the workforce. During the last year or so, there was a lot of layoffs and whatnot. So I think they're definitely going to have to revisit their programs, and they're going to have to revisit their ability to hire new talent, whether it's in the U.S. or in foreign workers. And there may even be a greater push for automation um, because it's where the current environment has been going anyway, with the development of AI at this massive uh, amount of spending and breakneck speed that they're moving at. So HR is definitely going to change. H-1B is a part of it. Non-immigrant workers are a part of it, and they're all going to evolve as they've always done in the past.
Okay, and one more question on this before I go over to Min for worker perspective. Do you think employers can see reputational risks if they reduce or eliminate H-1B sponsorships? Is that something that they should be concerned about?
I don't think so. It's H-1B hiring or not hiring or hiring people on different employment-based visas such as L and E. It's part of the process. Layoffs or reductions or changing of staff has always been looked at differently from a different perspective. From an employee morale perspective, it may be very, very bad. But from a corporate America perspective, you just don't know how the world takes it. So it could potentially have a problem. They could potentially face criticism, and it could potentially just be something that's just, overlooked completely.
Good to know. And if you are watching this and interested in receiving updates about this, please sign up for our newsletter at troop.com. You can sign up for our immigration, corporate, accounting newsletter, and we can give you all of the updates. So, Min, I want to go over to you to look at things from a worker's perspective and what risks they might be facing. So, let's say an H-1B worker is abroad for personal reasons when their extension is filed. Will the fee apply upon reentry? What do we need to know here?
Right. So, I suppose effective September 21st, 2025, the proclamation says that employers, they must pay the $100,000 fee for any initial H-1B petition filed on behalf of a beneficiary who is outside the United States at the time of filing. Therefore, petitions seeking to cancel process and admit an H-1B worker from abroad, those petitions will likely trigger this one-time charge of $100,000 in order for the beneficiary to re-enter the U.S. But this is where I want to kind of circle back to the fact that all this is a really fluid situation. Over the weekend after the proclamation was issued, because the proclamation was so broad and rather clumsy in in its language, USCIS they were forced to clarify some of the proclamation's nuanced details. But to be honest, Ariana, I don't know if those further clarifications helped. Because in particular, USCIS apparently confirmed that payment of the $100,000 fee is not required for H-1B, quote unquote, renewals. But what's a renewal? Sure, an H-1B extension filed by the same employer is definitely a renewal. But what about an H-1B transfer petition that also seeks to extend the beneficiary's H-1B status for another 3 years? Isn't that an H-1B, status, quote unquote, renewed for 3 years, but with a different employer? Or, what about, renewing an H-1B visa at the consulate? That's a renewal, isn't it? There's a reason why the word renewal is not often used within professional immigration circles because it's so open-ended and broad in its application. So, while extension of stay with the same employer, that we're confident in knowing that those are clearly excluded from this $100,000 fee, the term quote unquote renewal has not been fully defined, thereby, leaving some open questions about its application to other H-1B filing types.
Okay, understood. So, can workers transfer to a capped exempt employer to avoid the fee? And if so, are there any risks involved in this?
Well, I mean, I suppose that's one question that we have some confidence in saying that it's not possible where a worker can transfer to a cap exempt employer in order to avoid the fee. The $100,000 fee, unfortunately, it does appear to apply to cap exempt employers as well. By the express terms of the presidential proclamation and the agency guidance that followed after that, there doesn't appear to be any kind of categorical exception for cap exempt H-1B petitioners, which is kind of absurd if you if you ask me. We're talking about nonprofit organizations here. So we have an agency that, before agreed to offer reduced I-129 filing fees for smaller businesses and qualifying nonprofits. And this just only happened a few months ago. But now, according to this proclamation, that same agency is now demanding that those same small businesses and nonprofits, they shell out $100,000 for every new H-1B petition filed for a beneficiary who happens to be overseas. The same $100,000 that the likes of Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and other tech giants are having to pay. The difference is, obviously those tech giants, they can afford it, whereas our nonprofits and small business owners and startups, they clearly cannot. So it's rather absurd. I suppose the one saving grace might be, this national interest exception. But once again, we have absolutely no guidance or, even a general procedure on how to apply for one and who is eligible, for these exceptions. The agency hasn't officially released any of that information yet. And there's been some rumors that the medical doctors and medical professionals might receive a blanket exception based upon national interest. But once again, that's not official, as the government has rather remained silent on this. So it's still unclear as to whether a cap exempt organization as a whole may obtain a national interest exception based solely on their cap exempt status.
Okay, so we'll have to keep an eye out for more news on that. What about foreign workers who might be visa exempt, like Canadians? Does the proclamation apply to them? And also, does the proclamation apply to the Chile, Singapore H-1B1 program?
For Canadians, yes, it would appear that the proclamation applies to those Canadian nationals in the same way that it would apply to other nationalities, despite the fact that Canadian nationals are not required to obtain an H-1B visa in their passport. So, even though the proclamation goes into whether a foreigner already has an H-1B visa in his or her passport or needs to apply for one at the consulate, and Canadians obviously don't have that problem, the proclamation at its core, it's essentially a travel ban issued by the president pursuant to his statutory powers found in the Immigration and Nationality Act at Section 212, lowercase f. And those powers based upon the statute, those powers are fairly wide. And just because, one might be visa exempt, given their Canadian nationality, it wouldn't protect them from this proclamation, unfortunately. And, as for your other question regarding the H-1B1 program for Chileans and Singaporeans, The proclamation is clear in that it applies only to H-1B specialty occupation workers under a specific section of the INA, which does not extend to H-1B entrants from Chile or Singapore. So it would appear to me that H-1B1 visa processing and travel should therefore remain unchanged and unaffected by this presidential proclamation. But with that said, during implementation and when processes are kind of put in place by the different government agencies involved, and in particular CBP at the port of entry, H-1B1 applicants, they should still be ready to encounter delays or maybe even confusion at those ports of entries. And if questioned, those same H-1B1 beneficiaries, they should be prepared to clarify to the port of entry officers that H-1B1 is a distinct classification that's not subject to the proclamation.
Understood. Can you provide us some real-time insight into how those cases within the margins are being treated, like H-1B transfers? From this week's webinar series on the topic, it seems like a pretty solid takeaway that H-1B change of employer petitions when the beneficiaries in the US are not affected by the proclamation. Is this true in practice? Can you tell us what you're seeing on the ground?
Yeah, it does appear that such transfer cases are not yet affected by the proclamation, at least for now. But without expressed agency clarification that such H-1B change of employer petitions requesting extension of stays are exempt from the proclamation, all this is just conjecture at this point. I suppose you have to bear in mind that once again, there is no established mechanism as of now for federal agencies to even collect this $100,000 fee. And how this is playing out in real life is that, I suppose as of just a couple of days ago, it does appear that USCIS has been accepting and receiving H-1B change of employer petitions that were filed in premium processing on or after September 21st without any kind of issue. But regardless, guidance is still needed on whether that fee, once implemented, will be collected as a precondition to USCIS adjudication, or perhaps even prior to visa issuance by a U.S. consulate.
Wow, so much great info there. Thank you, Min, for covering that. Kirti, I want to go over to you to look at things a little bit about how they look beyond the H-1B and what that impact will be. So do you think this can create pressure for similar fees in other visa categories in the future? Is that something we need to be worried about?
Um, I'm gonna address that question. I just wanted to add something to what Min said earlier in terms of, you wanted some examples on the ground filings and whatnot. So we have been filing them, transfers and extension this week. And as you mentioned, we've gotten receipt notices from premium processing because we get them via email. What that indicates is that they've accepted the petition for now. We don't know what happens after that. Whenever we file a petition, we get a receipt notice as long as we met the minimum requirements of filing, such as the forms are accurate, the payments are accurate, and they're complete, right? The petition is complete. So we filed extensions and transfers via premium processing that are complete from that standpoint without the $100,000 fee. We've gotten a receipt. Now, what does that mean? We're not really sure per se. Are they going to simply adjudicate the petition as they have in the past? Or they may issue a request for evidence, you know, asking for this $100,000 fee or asking for a clarification. We don't know. But again, we'll keep everybody posted on our chug alerts that we normally send out. So with that little extra add on there, I'm gonna you asked, your question was that how will this impact other categories in the future? And it's possible that it may impact other categories in the future. They're, I guess they're currently in a phase to examine all immigration programs. It seems like the agency currently is. And, they may examine other employment-based visas such as OWL and other ones as well. But I think it'll just it is kind of just a wait and see game here to see how it will play out depending on the response for the And if the proclamation expires and nothing happened, anything can really happen in that sense. So, um, long story short, I think everything is up for grabs at this point where it may impact other visas, it may not. It's just a wait and see depending on how much they impact. H-1B is one of the highest volumes, I believe, from an employment-based standpoint. So whatever results that come out of here will more or less likely follow, or they may re-examine the whole program itself in terms of how employment-based visas are even looked at and may even consider other programs such as the European system or the Canadian system in terms of, bringing people in for employment.
Absolutely, yeah. There are also other visa options, as you mentioned. So if you are watching this and have questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to guide you on this. So how might this affect dependent visa categories like L2 or E2 family members, even if indirectly? Will they be affected?
My guess right now is that they're not the primary focus, so I don't think they should be impacted. Um, some of these visas allow their spouses to obtain employment in the U.S., such as an L2 spouse, which is a dependent visa to a L1 visa. Um, some H4 employees, some H4 visa holders are allowed to work if the primary H-1B holder has been in a green card employment-based green card process for some time. So it may or may not impact, but I don't think it's a current primary focus. But we'll just have to see how that goes.
Got it. Do you think the proclamation could shift demand towards employment-based green cards? And if so, do you think that will affect processing times as well?
Um, the demand has always been so high, so I'm not sure how much you can add to the backlog. Um, there's some most countries are exempt from the backlog for green cards. However, countries that are oversubscribed, such as India, China, their backlogs are for even sometimes even I would say approximately a decade. And what the backlog essentially means is that their application was filed or their petition was filed um, 10 years ago or whatnot, and they're still waiting for the visas to become available. And every year the government releases a certain number of visas and they get used up quite quickly. So um, with such backlog, I don't know how that'll necessarily impact green card. Um, People from other nationalities that are not oversubscribed, they may or may not apply quicker. Employers may move to hire them on, apply green cards for them quicker. And that may be that's the little area where it might impact it. But given that the oversubscribed countries are the primary users of employment-based green cards, it's kind of hard to see how it would impact it in a larger scheme of things.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. Let's go over to Min to take a look at the future and what we might expect to see. So, starting with the biggest unanswered questions, Min, what are the current biggest unanswered questions from USCIS and DOS that employers need clarity on right now?
Right. I mean, at least for me, probably the three most important unanswered questions are, one, whether H-1B change of employer or transfer petitions, and or H-1B amendment filings that were filed on or after September 21st, whether those petitions will be treated as quote unquote new filings based on the proclamation and thus subject to the $100,000 fee. We sort of have an idea, that, perhaps those petitions will be exempt, but, as I said, we're not entirely 100% sure. A second question would be, whether foreign nationals who are present in the United States in a different visa status other than H-1B and who are sponsored to change their visa status to that of an H-1B on or after September 21st, whether those foreign nationals kind of fall within the proclamation scope. And then three, whether yeah, whether such individuals would trigger the proclamation's restrictions if an H-1B petition happens to be filed for them after September 21st, and they happen to subsequently depart the United States to obtain an H-1B visa from the consulate. I suppose there's still a lot of indecision regarding those regarding that population. Now, yeah, I mean, that first scenario that I mentioned, it does appear, I know Kirti kind of touched on that as well, when it comes to, what we're seeing in practice, those transfer petitions are being receipted, premium processing is issuing those email notifications regarding receipt. But until those petitions are fully adjudicated, and even after adjudication, once the H-1B visa applicant, if he or she happens to, depart the U.S. after and then needs to apply for visa stamping, what's going to happen at the consulate, those things are still, kind of up in the air as of now. And for, scenario 2 and 3, I mean, I suppose there simply is, not enough data and real user cases for us to speculate strongly one way or another unless and until those federal agencies they release their official guidance on how all this will be implemented. We're sort of kind of left resorting to unfortunately trial and error and this mass speculation.
Definitely. What about long-term policy changes? Do you think this might signal for employment-based immigration overall?
Well, I mean, the proclamation, it definitely reflects a shift towards using executive authority on the part of the president to regulate labor market impacts through the imposition of these immigration fees. This could, I suppose, foreshadow future measures by the government that tie immigration benefits more closely to economic or security considerations that are important to the United States. Employers, I suppose, they should expect more volatility in this landscape. Um, I know it probably received far less attention than this $100,000 fee for H-1Bs, but on that same day, as the proclamation, the president also issued his executive order, officially charging the relevant heads of the Department of Commerce, Department of State, and Department of Homeland Security to implement his Gold Card and Platinum Card programs. Once again, using immigration as a leverage tool to, kind of push forward the administration's specific policy agenda. We can also cite to the new proposed rule in administering the H-1B cap lottery and how it stands right now is if the rule is finalized and becomes official, H-1B cap will be a weighted selection system rather than a pure random lottery that awards, those coveted H-1B registrations to only the highest earners. And, I suppose, incidentally, to those same mega corporations that can afford to pay top dollar for the talent they want to hire. There's also that directive from the president to the Secretary of Department of Labor to revamp the current prevailing wage system and essentially make prevailing wage numbers higher, which once again, kind of pushes out small businesses and startups and nonprofits and kind of only leaves those giant tech companies to play in this H-1B overall space and arena. So all of that is policy, and it's using immigration as a leverage tool to push the administration's agenda forward.
Great points there that a lot of us might have not considered before. So, how do you think employers should plan now for fiscal year 2026 H-1B cap season, given this uncertainty? What should they be doing right now?
Well, that's like the $1 million question, isn't it? There's certainly much uncertainty, but I suppose for now, employers should, I would think just keep ramping up their planning for the lottery next year, but also be mindful to budget for the possibility of the $100,000 fee. They should also explore alternative visa options. I know Kirti kind of went over that, earlier for, rather critical roles and evaluate whether, early green card sponsorship might be more cost effective for certain high net worth employees.
Absolutely. Definitely reach out to us if you are looking for alternatives for your business. We are happy to guide you. So, what practical steps would you say both employers and workers should take to remain flexible as guidance evolves?
Um, Well, I mean, I suppose one takeaway is that, if your prospective, H-1B hire is already in the US, for example, let's say he or she is in F1 status, or perhaps in H-1B status with another employer, it's certainly advisable to file the H-1B as a change of status or transfer petition and request for extension of stay so that international travel is absolutely avoided. You have to remember that this presidential proclamation is pursuant to the president's powers as they are found in protecting our nation's borders. It's a travel ban, essentially, as the INA, kind of gives him the authority to broadly decide which class of people can and should enter the US. So as of now, it would appear that under current guidance, these change of status and transfer petitions, they're not subject to the $100,000 fee. Whereas, departing to obtain an H-1B visa from a consular post abroad, those visa applications at the consulate, they could implicate the proclamation. Until further instructions are issued, deferring non-essential international travel, I believe it's certainly best practice. And above all else, know that the situation remains fluid. And as employers and employees, you have to remain agile and flexible in your overall approach. The administration may certainly announce categorical or case-by-case exemptions in the next few days, exemptions for, physicians, let's say, or certain critical industries. And USCIS may also issue further FAQs clarifying coverage. Stakeholders, they should monitor official agency communications, consult with your experienced immigration counsel. The scope and application of the fee, it can certainly narrow or expand as additional guidance is released publicly. Overall, employers should, they should maintain close communication with their, trusted immigration partners, create contingency budgets, and employees overall, they should avoid non-essential travel until more is known. Flexibility and overall preparation, I suppose those are the best strategies when so many things are left to be clarified.
Wow, so much great insight there. Thank you so much, Min. We do have a live question before we close out, if either of you want to take it. How are you advising companies on cap-exempt H-1B change of status from B1 to H-1B or H-4 to H-1B?
Um, I'm gonna preface this answer with what Min harped on over and over again, and I've done this with my clients in this past week, is that this situation is very fluid. It's changing pretty much almost every day. To give you an example, I gave some advice to somebody on Saturday morning, and then by Saturday afternoon, there was some more information out, and my advice had to be modified within like the hour I sent the email. Okay, so with that said, in terms of filing change of status, I think as long as they're exempt, it's okay to file them. I don't see that being any different from somebody changing employers or filing an extension. Um, you just have to be careful, however, that you're not violating your current status. So, for example, if a B1 holder is trying to transfer to an H-1B, are they violating their status? That's something that you need to examine, because you have to remember, B visas are not dual intent. However, there are some exceptions around filing a change of status in those situations. But you have to examine each individual situation uh, by itself and then make the decision whether transfer is possible. However, on those visas that are dual intent or do not have a single intent requirement, um, it filing a change of status from H4 to H-1B, as long as they're cap exempt, I don't see that being any different, like I said, about as if filing from an H-1B to an H-1B, but to a different employer.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think Kirti kind of characterized it really well. I guess I keep kind of going back to the point that, this proclamation is based upon the statutory authority that the president has in kind of protecting our borders. So therefore, as long as that person remains in the US, a change of status from B1, B2 or H4, yeah, those precautions, especially if it's a visitor, as Kirti was kind of, underscoring, that should definitely be something to consider. But as long as you remain in the US, it doesn't appear, at least from the specific expressed intention and meaning in how the proclamation is worded, that the $100,000 fee would apply. You held, as a beneficiary, you held H-1B status before, 3, 4, 5 years ago. Since then, maybe you married an H-1B principal and you changed your status to an H-4 spouse. But now, for whatever life circumstance, you feel compelled to go back to an H-1B beneficiary and you have a sponsoring employer to petition for you in that regard. Should that employer and should that petitioner be worried that they're going to be hit with this 100,000? As I said, we're almost there in being 100% clear.
Yes.
As of now, not yet, but it doesn't appear that the additional fee would apply in that situation, at least from what we know now.
Wow, such great insights today. Thank you so much, Min and Kirti, for taking the time to answer all of our questions on this topic.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Of course, my pleasure.
That is all we have time for today. So we are closing out day 4 of our live webinar on the $100,000 H-1B proclamation. Thank you everyone for joining us every day this week. We will be back next Thursday with our regular Thursday live streams. So make sure to join us then. If you have any questions on this topic or any other topic, email us anytime at info@chubb.com. We would love to guide you through this, and make sure you're signing up for our newsletter alerts, especially during this time. We will update you as soon as we get any updates regarding immigration, corporate, accounting. We have other sectors as well, so make sure you sign up for those. And join us back next week for more pressing topics that truly matter to you and your business. Until next time, stay safe and take care, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. See you next time.
Bye.